Welcome, and thank you for joining us for our third annual Prenatal-to-3 Research to Policy Summit. This event is an opportunity to recognize and celebrate the tremendous progress that states have made over this past year in implementing policies that are proven to positively impact the health and well-being of our infants and toddlers and their parents. I'm Cynthia Osborne, and I have the privilege of directing the Prenatal-to-3 Policy Impact Center at Vanderbilt University. And the whole purpose of the Policy Impact Center is to be a resource for state leaders to help you identify and implement the most effective policies that create more equitable environments and help children thrive from the start. We know that you, as state policy leaders and advocates, want to implement evidence-based policies that will actually make a difference in the lives of the children and families in your state. But the evidence of what really works is difficult to find. So, we did the work for you. We turned to the research and we read thousands of articles and we carefully reviewed hundreds of the most rigorous studies that have been conducted to learn which state policies have the largest impact on improving the health and well-being of infants and toddlers and their parents. And these are the policies and strategies that we've included in the roadmap. So today, we are excited to share with you our third annual Prenatal-to-3 State Policy Roadmap. It's a guide for states not only to understand how your children and families are doing, but how state policy choices can help them to do better. In 2020, we unveiled the 5 policies and 6 strategies that our comprehensive reviews of most rigorous research found to be the most effective at creating the conditions in which children thrive. Now, we are continuously working to build the evidence base, and we'll add new policies or strategies to the roadmap as more evidence becomes available. But as a refresher for those who have seen the roadmap, or an introduction to those who are joining us for the first time, I'd like to share with you what we've learned so far. For the 5 policies, the research shows that expanding income eligibility for health insurance through expanding Medicaid leads to healthier birth outcomes and reduced financial hardships that can be caused by out-of-pocket health care expenses. Second, implementing a bundle of policies to reduce administrative burdens increases eligible families' access to SNAP. Now, reducing administrative burdens is one of the simplest and most cost-effective policies that states can implement. It often doesn't require legislative action and can be done through administrative or regulatory changes. And we use the example of SNAP, which is the most effective nutritional program that we have in this country. And it is one in which the research is clear on how to increase access to this important benefit among eligible families. So third is a paid family leave program that provides a minimum of 6 weeks of paid leave from work following the birth, adoption, or placement of a child in foster care. And this is one of the most pro-work and pro-family policies that exists. It increases the likelihood that the parent will return to work, it substantially increases household income, and reduces poverty. Access to paid leave also improves the mother's physical and emotional health. It increases bonding between the parent and the child, and it leads to improved child outcomes, including reductions in severe head trauma. So fourth is a state minimum wage that's at least $10 an hour. It not only increases household resources and reduces poverty with little to no negative impact on employment, it also leads to healthier birth outcomes. It leads to lower levels of child neglect and improved child health outcomes, which have beneficial impacts throughout the children's school years. So finally is a state earned income tax credit that's refundable and at least 10% of the federal EITC. This policy substantially boosts employment and household resources, and surprisingly, it's one of the most effective policies that we have to reduce disparities in adverse birth outcomes. So for the 6 strategies, research shows us this: comprehensive screening and referral programs that identify the specific needs of children and families and connects them to those needed services. They increase families' access to community services. They also increase the likelihood that children will attend their well visits, enroll in higher quality childcare settings, receive their immunizations on time, And children are less likely to be placed in the wrong sleep position or to have to visit the emergency department. Childcare subsidies that make access to high-quality childcare more affordable for working parents leads to an increase in employment and in greater stability in childcare arrangements. As we all know, subsidies are a critical element to our economy by allowing parents to actually work. Group prenatal care models that provide more social support and services to expectant parents lead to an increase in the likelihood of adequate prenatal care, to better mental health for the new parent, and it increases the initiation of breastfeeding. Our evidence-based home visiting programs build new parents' skills and knowledge of child development and of healthy parenting practices. And our early Head Start, now that promotes healthy social, emotional, cognitive, and physical development in young children. It assists parents in developing positive parenting skills and moving towards self-sufficiency, and it brings together community partners and resources to provide families with comprehensive services and supports. And finally, the early intervention, or Part C services, can improve young children's cognitive development, language and communication skills, their behavior, their motor skills, and it reduces the children's need for services as they get older. So altogether, these 11 evidence-based solutions provide a combination of broad-based economic and family supports and more targeted interventions that create the conditions in which children thrive from the start. We are excited to have thousands of you join us today to celebrate the progress that states have made this past year in implementing these policies and strategies that we know will positively impact children and families. We're also thrilled to be joined by several state policy leaders who will share why they believe investing in our youngest children is a good investment and how important it is for policy leaders to champion policies that have a strong evidence base. Today, I hope that you walk away from this event with 3 key points in mind. First, we know what works. If you want to positively impact the lives of children and families, this roadmap provides a clear path toward implementing policies that work. Second, variation in state policy choices leads to a patchwork of benefits and services for families, which leads to wide variation in child well-being across this country. Most of us read the incredible report that Child Trends produced and that Jason DeParle wrote about regarding the substantial declines in child poverty over the past several decades. They attribute these declines to enhancements in social policies over this time period. But I would add to their important work by reminding us that federal policies apply to all children and families similarly, but it is state policy choices, including how states implement federal policies, that lead to wide variation in child poverty rates and other critical measures of health and well-being across the states. So the third point is that there is no magic bullet. There is not one policy or one program that can do it all. For children to truly thrive, we need a comprehensive system of support that is equitable and effective. And our roadmap provides a guide on how to create this system of care. So thank you for joining us, and thank you for all of the work that you do to improve the lives of infants and toddlers and their parents. Now, let's look more closely at that roadmap. So this morning, you should have received a link to our updated Prenatal-to-3 state policy roadmap. With thousands of you opening the roadmap at the same time, it is possible that we will break the internet again this year, but trust me, it's worth it. And this year, we have added new state summaries that provide a snapshot of your state's policy progress and how you can strengthen your system of support for children and families. We've also added in a simulation to illustrate how the roadmap policies and strategies interact to provide resources to working parents in each state. Now, as a bit of background for those of you who may be less familiar with the roadmap, it builds on the science of the developing child that tells us that the prenatal to age 3 period is the most rapid and sensitive period of development. Often people talk about investing in early childhood so that kids are prepared for school and ready to learn. Well, I have a secret for you. We are born learning, and we will learn more in the first 3 years than in any other period of our lives. But what we learn and whether we reach our optimal health and well-being depends on the conditions we are exposed to in these earliest years. Children who are exposed to safe, stable, stimulating, and nurturing environments during the prenatal-to-3 period are set on a path for optimal brain and body development. However, if we experience trauma or chronic adversity in this sensitive developmental period, such as chronic poverty or exposure to violence or racism, it can cause neurological, physiological, and social damage to the developing brain and body systems that can have lifelong consequences for the individual as well as society. As I said, the science could not be clearer about the conditions that children need to thrive from the start. And our team translated the science into 8 prenatal-to-3 policy goals that all states should strive to achieve. So we know that families need access to the benefits and services for which they're eligible. Parents need to be able to work and care for their children. Families need stability in their resources, including food security, adequate housing, and stable and sufficient incomes. And children need to be born healthy to healthy parents, taking into consideration both the physical and mental health needs. And parents need the skills and knowledge of children's development to engage in those nurturing behaviors with their children that we know are the key to promoting healthy brain and body development. And when children are not with their parents, they also need to be in high-quality nurturing environments. And importantly, we need to screen children to know that they are on track for healthy development. And when children experience a developmental delay, we need to get them connected to the services that they need to get them back on track to optimal health and well-being. And the purpose of this roadmap is to share with you what rigorous research shows are the most effective policies and strategies that states can implement to create those conditions and meet those 8 policy goals. State policy leaders have been asking for this evidence so that they can implement what works. And this roadmap helps remove the guesswork for you, and it guides state policy leaders to make evidence-based choices. So I invite you now to have a look at the new 2022 Prenatal-to-3 State Policy Roadmap.
The Prenatal-to-3 State Policy Roadmap is a guide for state leaders to help them develop and implement the most effective policies and strategies that create a stronger and more equitable system of support for infants and toddlers and their parents. Based on comprehensive reviews of the most rigorous evidence available, the State Policy Roadmap identifies 5 effective policies and 6 effective strategies that help to create the conditions in which children thrive. In addition to providing guidance on what works, the roadmap monitors states' annual progress toward adopting and fully implementing these effective state actions, and measures the well-being of infants and toddlers in each state. You can explore the U.S. Roadmap, which provides a summary of all states' progress and well-being, or explore any individual state and the District of Columbia by using the drop-down menu. The U.S. Roadmap begins with a summary page. It shows the number of states that have fully implemented each of the effective policies, as well as the states that are leading the way in implementing the effective strategies. The summary also briefly highlights the legislative and administrative activity states engage in over the last year toward policy adoption. Scroll down to see how the 8 science-driven Prenatal-to-3 policy goals align with the 5 effective roadmap policies and 6 effective strategies. Each column represents one of the 8 policy goals, and the shaded circles in each row indicate that the policy or strategy positively impacts that goal and enhances the well-being of infants, toddlers, and their parents. The framework also illustrates the child and family outcome measures that are associated with each policy goal, which we are tracking over time. In addition to providing information on what works, the State Policy Roadmap tracks states' progress toward adopting and implementing the effective policies. To date, 6 states have fully implemented all 5 of the roadmap policies, and another 16 states have implemented at least 3. Over time, the hope is that all states fully implement all 5 effective policies. Over the past year, 8 states fully implemented at least one new policy this year: Connecticut, Delaware, Kentucky, Indiana, Maryland, Nevada, Washington, and Virginia implemented 2. This year, for the first time, we have included our simulation of how policy choices impact family resources across states within the roadmap, illustrating the wide variation across states. These analyses also highlight how the level of resources available vary across states based on 2 other important policy choices: Medicaid expansion and a paid family leave program of at least 6 weeks. The U.S. Roadmap summary page also shows how opportunities and outcomes vary considerably for infants and toddlers across states. These measures help states to set priorities for where to begin to build a stronger and more equitable prenatal-to-3 system of support. More detailed information is available for each effective policy and strategy, and you can select the one that interests you. Each policy profile begins with a snapshot of the policy goals that it impacts, the states that have fully implemented the policy, and a brief summary of the progress states have made toward adopting the policy in the past year. Strategy profiles are similar, except that, in the absence of clear guidelines on legislative or regulatory actions a state can take to garner the impacts at a statewide level, the roadmap provides state leaders that are implementing evidence-based programs and making them accessible to a significant number of families. Each policy and strategy also includes a summary of associated outcomes. This is where you can go to find examples of the positive impact the policy can have on prenatal-to-3 policy goals, such as healthy and equitable births and a parent's ability to work. For example, this table indicates that a paid family leave policy of at least 6 weeks has been shown to lead an average increase of $3,400 in household income among mothers of 1-year-olds and an 8 percentage point increase in maternal labor force participation in the months surrounding birth, among many other things. In addition, the roadmap provides information on the legislative and administrative activities states engage in toward policy adoption, including whether the state introduced legislation, if that legislation met the roadmap threshold, and if it was enacted. We know that policy change often takes time, and that progress is often made even if the policy is not fully implemented. Hover over a state for details on its legislative activity. Policies can vary considerably across states, so the roadmap provides details on how each state implements a given policy. Paid family leave policies, for example, vary in the weeks offered, the portion of wages workers receive, funding mechanisms, and more. Each state has its own page, providing a snapshot of the policies the state has fully implemented, and indicates with a star the strategies on which the state is considered a leader. The state roadmap provides details on how each state compares to others in terms of policy and strategy implementation and aligned child and parent outcome measures. For example, the Connecticut roadmap indicates that it is one of 25 states that is fully implementing a minimum wage of $10 or greater. Connecticut's minimum wage is currently $14 an hour. Higher minimum wages should reduce the percentage of children who have at least one full-time working parent but are still living near poverty. In Connecticut, 13.4% of children have a working parent and are still living near poverty. Compared to other states, this is relatively low, especially compared to the poorest performing states where more than 1/3 of children with a full-time working parent are still living near poverty. The state roadmap also provides details on how state policy choices impact a family's annual resources and how it compares to other states. Connecticut is ranked 19 out of 51 states. Data are provided illustrating the range on 20 outcome measures of child and family well-being between the state in which children and their parents are faring the best and the state in which they are faring the worst, and demonstrates where the state fits within that range. These data can help state leaders prioritize their prenatal-to-3 policy goals and track the well-being of children and families. Finally, each state profile includes demographic characteristics. These data are a useful way to understand the population of infants and toddlers in your state, the unique needs they may have, and whether the needs are similar by race and ethnicity, geography, and socioeconomic status. The roadmap also provides comparisons of outcome measures across all states and by race and ethnic group for each of the 20 outcome measures. The goal is to create a stronger and more equitable system of support for infants and toddlers, so we should see reductions in race and ethnic disparities in these measures as more states implement the roadmap policies and strategies. The final section of the roadmap provides information on the demographic characteristics of infants and toddlers and their parents. Where possible, the information is disaggregated by race and ethnicity. For detailed information on all of the data used in the roadmap and our sources, visit the Methods and Sources page. The Prenatal-to-3 State Policy Roadmap builds on the science of the developing child and identifies the 11 most effective investments that states can make to empower parents and foster the conditions in which children thrive from the start. This guide for state leaders also illustrates the progress that states are making toward implementing the effective solutions, and it allows state leaders to monitor the well-being of infants and toddlers over time.
Wow. Let's be honest, that was a lot, and we just barely scratched the surface. So, how should you dig into all of this information? Well, so one option is that you can just sit down with a hot cup of tea or a beverage of your choice and read it all from start to finish. The US summary, your state summary page, the 11 profiles of each of the effective policies and strategies, the demos and the outcomes, and of course, methods and sources. But it honestly does not take that long to read the whole thing, and you'll feel like a policy expert when you're all finished, I promise. But as a professor, I know that this is very unlikely unless I give you a test, which I won't yet. But joking aside, we recognize that states have different priorities and political contexts, and the roadmap is designed to help you meet the goals you have for your state. So the best place to begin is to prioritize your policy goals. You may already have specific policy goals in mind, or you may begin by looking at how your children and families in your state are faring and determine where you're making progress and where you're lagging on key measures of health and well-being. And you can find a brief overview of this information in your state summary. We're providing an example using Tennessee's summary page, which is now the center's new home state. And we identified a set of outcome measures that are aligned to each of the 8 Prenatal-to-3 policy goals that tell us how children and families are faring in your state compared to other states. For example, the roadmap indicates that 10.9% of babies in Tennessee are born preterm or before the 37th week of gestation, and the state ranks 41st out of 51 states on this measure. Being born preterm is associated with a host of negative outcomes for children that can last a lifetime. So Tennessee should be concerned that nearly 1 out of 10 babies experience this adversity. By using the roadmap framework, leaders in Tennessee can determine the most effective policy options that reduce the rate of preterm births and promote healthier birth outcomes. The roadmap framework, which can be found in the U.S. summary section of the roadmap, illustrates how the outcome measures and the state policy goals and the effective policy solutions align. Each of the columns represents one of the 8 policy goals, and it indicates the outcome measures that are associated with that goal. The colored dots indicate which of the roadmap policies and strategies positively impact each goal. And by using the framework, Tennessee leaders will find that preterm birth outcomes are aligned to the policy goal of healthy and equitable births, and that there are 3 policy options proven to positively impact that goal, including Medicaid expansion, a minimum wage of at least $10 an hour, and a refundable state earned income tax credit that's at least 10% of the federal EITC. People are often surprised that these broader economic supports have a larger impact on improving birth outcomes than more targeted interventions. But reducing the stress associated with income instability and providing access to healthcare address the root causes of adverse birth outcomes. So the state's leaders could then navigate to the policy profile sections of the roadmap to gather clear guidance on implementation to ultimately improve birth outcomes in the state. Again, the roadmap is designed to be a tool for you to adopt and implement the most effective policies and strategies that meet your policy goals. So now it's time to celebrate states' progress. It's time to recognize and celebrate the tremendous progress that many states made this past year in adopting and implementing at least one of the roadmap policies. Later in this event, we'll celebrate the state leaders who serve as exemplars to other states on how to implement the effective strategies. But for now, let's focus on policies. So to begin, I want to recognize two states, Connecticut and Washington, who have now implemented all 5 of the effective roadmap policies. Congratulations to the policy leaders and advocates in those states for the incredible efforts over many years that you have put into making this happen, and to the children and families who will benefit. This year, Connecticut fully implemented its 12-week paid family leave program that it enacted in 2019. And so that's what's brought it to a 5 out of 5. The state had previously implemented the other 4 policies. It was one of the 6 original states to expand Medicaid, and it has implemented policies to reduce the administrative burden for SNAP for several years. The state's minimum wage is $14 an hour, and this year it enacted legislation to even expand its refundable EITC from 30.5% of the federal credit to 41.5% of the federal credit beginning in tax year 2023. So well done, Connecticut. Washington has also now fully implemented all 5 roadmap policies by funding its working family tax credit, a tax refund that's modeled after the EITC. Washington enacted the policy in 2008, but it didn't fund it at that time. And this year, it became the first and only state who doesn't have an income tax to implement a state-earned income tax credit, which proves that it's possible to do. Families in Washington also benefit from the other 4 roadmap policies. Like Connecticut, Washington was one of the original 6 states to expand Medicaid, and the state makes it relatively easy for families to access SNAP. It offers 12 weeks of paid family leave and a minimum wage of nearly $14.50 an hour. Washington is truly implementing broad-based economic and family supports that really help children to thrive from the start. Congratulations. These 2 states now joined California, the District of Columbia, Massachusetts, and New Jersey in fully implementing all 5 roadmap policies. When we launched our roadmap in 2020, there were only 3 states that had implemented all 5, and now there are 6. But as you can see from this graphic, there's a huge variation across the country in the number of effective policies that states have implemented. 10 states have fully implemented 4 out of 5 of the effective policies, which is really impressive. And among those states, we know that Oregon and Rhode Island will fully implement all 5 effective policies next year when they implement their paid family leave programs. And there could be other states as well. But there are 9 states that have implemented only 1 of the effective policies, and there are 6 that have not implemented any of them. This graphic really illustrates how much work we have to do to ensure that all of our children live in environments in which they thrive. In this country, the state in which you are born has a huge impact on your health and well-being because of variation in state policy choices. There's also considerable variation in terms of which policies are being implemented widely. As you can see, 39 states have fully implemented Medicaid expansion, whereas only 7 states have fully implemented a paid family leave program of a minimum of 6 weeks. And only approximately half of states have implemented a minimum wage of at least $10 an hour or a refundable EITC of at least 10% of the federal credit. And as I said earlier, there is no magic bullet. It is the combination of all of these policies that will create the system of support in which children can thrive from the start. However, we certainly want to recognize that with the exception of Medicaid expansion, there was considerable progress this year in fully implementing these roadmap policies. Kentucky and Maryland increased their SNAP recertification interval from 6 to 12 months, making it easier for families to access this important benefit. And as I mentioned earlier, Connecticut fully implemented its 12-week paid family leave program. But importantly, Maryland and Delaware enacted 12-week paid family leave programs that will be implemented in a few years, bringing the total to 12 states who are currently implementing a paid family leave program at least 6 weeks, or that will do so in the next few years. And hopefully more states are going to follow. Low-wage workers in Delaware, Nevada, and Virginia all saw their wages increase to a minimum of $10 an hour this past year. All 3 states passed this $10 threshold based on previously scheduled increase, and at least 3 more states, Michigan, Ohio, and South Dakota, have increases scheduled to their minimum wages that will push them over the $10 threshold next year. Also, a special recognition to Hawaii that passed legislation to incrementally increase the state's minimum wage to $18 per hour in 2028. Also, congratulations to working families in Indiana, Virginia, and Washington who will now have access to a refundable earned income tax credit that's equivalent to at least 10% of the federal credit. Indiana and Washington implemented previously enacted policies, and Virginia enacted and implemented legislation this year. Well done. So that's 8 states: Connecticut, Delaware, Indiana, Kentucky, Maryland, Nevada, Virginia, and Washington that implemented at least one of the roadmap policies, and Virginia fully implemented 2, both the state minimum wage and the EITC policies. Congratulations and well done. But in addition to Virginia, 5 additional states deserve special recognition for their progress on one or more of the roadmap policies this past year. California enacted policies to expand the benefits of both its paid family leave programs and its state earned income tax credit, which will become effective in a few years. And Connecticut fully implemented its 12-week paid family leave program, and it expanded the benefits of its state earned income tax credit. Delaware's minimum wage passed the $10 threshold, and it enacted a 12-week paid family leave program that will go into effect in 2026. Hawaii enacted legislation to expand its state minimum wage and to make its earned income tax credit refundable and permanent. And Maryland increased its SNAP recertification interval to 12 months and enacted a 12-week paid family leave program that will be implemented in 2025. It's truly impressive policy progress. Congratulations. But we know that policy adoption and implementation does not happen overnight. It can take several legislative sessions before a policy moves from introduction to adoption, and even longer before families can actually benefit from the legislative or administrative change. Therefore, we track as much of the legislative activity as we can to learn what might be on the horizon for children and families in many states. And we're excited to report that of the 12 states that have not expanded Medicaid yet, 11 considered legislation this past year to do so. And although no state was successful, in North Carolina, a Medicaid expansion bill passed the Senate, and there are still negotiations ongoing in the legislature. And we'll hear from Senator Bergen in a minute to tell us more about the status of the bill. And in South Dakota, voters will cast their ballots in November to consider whether to expand Medicaid. So it is possible that we will announce next year that 2 additional states expanded health insurance coverage to lower income individuals. In addition, to date, 31 states have taken steps to extend Medicaid coverage from 60 days postpartum to a full year following a child's birth. And this is critically important, given that a substantial portion of maternal deaths occur after the 60 days. And this will allow millions of new parents to maintain health coverage. There was also a great deal of legislative activity for paid family leave programs. As I said, Delaware and Maryland enacted 12-week paid family leave programs this year, and 21 other states introduced legislation this past session to adopt a statewide paid family leave program of at least 6 weeks. And 19 of those states introduced at least one bill that would provide up to 12 weeks of benefits when fully implemented. This amount of legislative activity illustrates how important this policy is to so many families. Now, no states passed legislation this past year to enact a state minimum wage of $10 or greater. However, Nebraska will vote on a ballot measure in November of this year to incrementally increase the state minimum wage to $15 an hour by 2026. The state would join 10 other states that are scheduled to increase their minimum wages to at least $15 an hour within the next few years. And importantly, Alaska, Rhode Island, and Tennessee enacted legislation this past year to make their minimum wage policies more inclusive by eliminating the subminimum wage for workers with disabilities. And 14 states that already offer a refundable EITC that's at least 10% of the federal credit pushed to expand their benefit levels and eligibility even further. And legislation passed in 7 of these states, including in Illinois and DC, that expanded eligibility for the EITC to workers with an I-10 number. And more than half of states that have not yet fully implemented EITC introduced legislation to expand their credits or offer a state EITC for the first time. So although unsuccessful, 9 states, in addition to Virginia and Hawaii, introduced legislation to adopt a refundable EITC that's at least 10% of the federal credit. Another 7 states introduced legislation to adopt an EITC that was either non-refundable or less than the 10% of the federal credit. And of these states, Utah enacted legislation to adopt a 15% non-refundable state EITC that's effective this tax year. And Arkansas and North Dakota both adopted temporary non-refundable credits. And although those tax credits will surely help many families, it's important to understand that it's a refundable credit that's necessary to help the lowest earning working parents. The progress states have been made this year has been both exciting and inspiring. And we know that these actions will improve the lives of infants and toddlers and their families. And I encourage you to explore each state's progress in the state summaries, or to learn much more about policy progress and how states are implementing and funding these policies in the profile sections of the roadmap. So now we have the privilege of hearing from state policy leaders who supported many of these efforts. We are joined by 3 state senators, each from a state that has made laudable progress toward adopting and implementing the roadmap policies this past year. As I mentioned earlier, Hawaii enacted legislation to increase its minimum wage such that it will reach $18 an hour in 2028. And the state made its 20% EITC refundable and permanent. Senator San Buenaventura is joining us to discuss these impressive policy accomplishments. Also, Maryland increased its SNAP recertification interval from 6 to 12 months. And much more impressively, the state enacted 12 weeks of paid family leave. And Senator Hayes has joined us to discuss these policy wins. And we're also joined by Senator Bergen from North Carolina, who led the successful passage of a Medicaid expansion bill in the Senate. And he'll share with us where negotiations with the House stand and the likelihood that North Carolina will expand Medicaid this next year. Moderating this important conversation is Dr. Dan Worry. He's Senior Director of Early Learning at the Hunt Institute. And Dan has been a leader in the field of early care and education for decades and is known for his ability to engage elected officials in ways that create space for significant bipartisan support for policies that increase quality, access, and affordability for early education. Thank you all for joining us today, and I'll turn it over to you, Dan. Welcome.
Cynthia, thank you so much for that nice introduction, and what a treat to be with you and all of the great advocates for infants and toddlers around the country today. We are deeply grateful at the Hunt Institute for the good work of the Prenatal-to-3 Policy Impact Center, and so just a treat to be here today with these 3 fantastic state senators who are leading on this particular topic. For those of you who may not be familiar with the work of the Hunt Institute, the Institute is located in Cary, North Carolina. We are the brainchild of Jim Hunt, who was the four-term governor of North Carolina, served 16 years between 1977 and 2001 as governor of North Carolina. And the Institute is an education policy resource to the nation's governors and state lawmakers. And so I have the good fortune to lead our early childhood policy work in states across the country and to consult and to interact with great leaders like those that we have assembled today. As Cynthia mentioned, all three states, Hawaii, North Carolina, and Maryland, have taken legislative action this year to advance important policies for infants and toddlers and their families that are not only big steps forward for children, but also in alignment with the roadmap established by the Prenatal-to-3 Policy Impact Center. So I am delighted today to introduce you to Hawaii State Senator Joy San-Buenaventura, North Carolina Senator Jim Bergen, and Maryland Senator Antonio Hayes. It is great to be with all of you, and we're going to kick this conversation right off. I'm going to start by giving each of you an opportunity really to, just for 5 minutes or so, give each of you an opportunity to talk through the progress that has been made in your state and why, sort of where it stands, why it is important to children. And Senator San-Buenaventura, maybe we'll begin in Hawaii. I know that you have had, as Cynthia mentioned here just a few moments ago, success here in the recent past in terms of raising the minimum wage, action on an earned income tax credit, and also some exciting news on Medicaid. So let me turn things over to you to share a little bit about the good news that's coming out of Hawaii.
Thank you so much, and aloha from Hawaii. So as Chair of Human Services, it is my pleasure to have not only co-introduced a number of these bills, but help pass them. So Hawaii, when we got into the pandemic, had the lowest unemployment rate in the U.S. And when the pandemic hit, we had the highest unemployment rate. So we had cut services down to the bone in 2020, 2021. But surprisingly, in 22, our revenues had increased substantially. So we were able to do the Medicaid expansion that we wanted. We were able to make EITC, the state earned income tax credit, refundable. We had only previously passed, only a few years earlier, having a state earned income tax credit. But to make it refundable and permanent this past session was a substantial leap. I had introduced bills to even allow employees to reduce their withholding so that they will be able to benefit from the earned income tax credit per wage instead of waiting until the end of the year when they file their taxes. But that bill has failed, but I intend to reintroduce it next year. And we are also thrilled that our minimum wage has increased because we're a service industry in the state of Hawaii, because a lot of it is tourism and military. And the tourism, which is a service industry, are dependent upon minimum wage workers. So increasing it helps those, especially families who live paycheck to paycheck, will be able to hopefully be able to have their wages expand and cover more rents and more monies instead of being put in the hole every year. So we're thrilled. As you may pointed out, as of October 1st this year, from $10.10, it goes up to $12. Then it increases to $18 up for incrementally until 2028. And like I said, the biggest expansion was not only our Medicaid expansion to include postpartum 1 year after birth, but we also have expanded Medicaid to cover Medicaid dental. And that is a huge thing. And one of the things that also was one of my bills I was thrilled with that hasn't been covered here is my child wellness bill. It's an incentive for families to get their kids to be examined by a doctor, so that they'll be reimbursed up to $50 for transportation or any loss of wages when they take their kids to be examined. So those are the good news for the state of Hawaii for prenatal, and I'm turning it back to you.
Very exciting, Senator. Thank you for all of those exciting updates from Hawaii. And I want to turn to Senator Jim Bergen of the Institute's home state here in North Carolina. Senator Bergen, I know after much conversation, there has been progress on Medicaid expansion in North Carolina. Share with us a little bit about what's happening for kids in North Carolina.
Thank you, Dan. And I just want to thank you and the Hunt Institute, and Cynthia, thank you too. It's a pleasure to be with you all today to talk about something really important. You all know that we are one of 12 states that haven't expanded Medicaid. It's been a discussion ever since I've been in the Senate and prior to that when I was even a county commissioner. And there was a lot of reasons and a lot of discussions about why not to do it. But after just years of talking and meeting with folks and looking at the amount of money involved and looking at the things that we could do, the decision was made that we needed to have a big, hearty discussion about it, and we did. And the Senate passed it with only 2 nay votes. So it went to the House. The House passed a different version. We are in negotiations now. Some of the stickling points are we have the CON, Certificate of Need process, is still in force in North Carolina, and there's a lot of us that feel like that needs to be changed, and especially around mental and opioid facilities. I personally think that we need to look at certain things on how they affect rural hospitals and make sure that we don't decimate our rural hospital system, but we also have to provide better services to folks. So one of the things we really did do that went into effect is we increased the coverage for women for postpartum coverage to 12 months. And we did that in the budget. So we did expand Medicaid. We went ahead and started looking at those things that we felt like would make an immediate difference. And that was one of the things we did. We also passed legislation to keep people on Medicaid when their children were taken and put in temporarily in foster care, because they would lose that service. And we didn't want people not going and getting treatment for either mental health issues or drug issues because they were losing coverage because their children had been temporarily taken away from them. So that was another big thing. The conservative thinking is that right now that we'll have a bigger discussion in December. I personally don't think we will pass anything until after the first of the year. I think there's some other details. We're still talking to the hospitals, all the folks that are involved, because there's a lot of people that are just concerned about the not only what it's going to do with the hospitals if we change the certificate of need, but also providing services. We're losing about $500 million a month by not expanding Medicaid, and there's a lot of things we could do. I'm actually sitting in a hotel boardroom right now. I just finished speaking to the addiction professionals of North Carolina, talking about this and a lot of other subjects because it affects so many people. It's hard for somebody to take care of their child if they've got a drug problem. It's hard for them to take care of their child if they've got a mental health problem. And I'm passionate about fixing those. I talk about mind, body, spirit. We've got to do something to bring all those together, because you can't be physically healthy and have mental health issues. You can't be mentally healthy and have physical. It's all wrapped together. And I think there's a spiritual component that we I'm a believer. I believe that the spiritual component has to be part of all of these discussions as we deal with people. So be happy to kind of flesh out this conversation. Look forward to many more conversations. Appreciate everybody that's taking time to be here and listen. I've traveled to say my good friend, the senator from Hawaii, we've been at a number of meetings together, and I've thoroughly enjoyed getting to know her and some of her colleagues and other folks. Ladies and gentlemen, all of us have these problems. They're just different with different names and different faces, but I think we can solve all of them. So thank you.
Senator Bergen, thank you so much. I have so many questions for each of you. We'll get to a little bit of Q&A and conversation here in just a moment, but I want to bring Maryland Senator Antonio Hayes into the conversation. Senator Hayes, I know that paid family leave has been one of the big victories in Maryland here recently. Bring us up to speed on how that came to be and what exactly has passed in Maryland.
Absolutely, and thank you, Dan, and Dr. Osborne for having us. And thank you to the Prenatal-to-3 Coalition for having us. In Maryland, it's been a long time coming. For the last couple of years, we've tried very hard at passing paid family leave because we know that it's very important, especially, also in addition to being here, I am the proud having my first child at 7 months. Little Antonio Agapito, welcome to the family. And so for me, this year, getting this bill passed after introducing it for 3 years was, such an accomplishment. And we know that, those early years of bonding with a child and his parents are so important to their growth and health. And so we passed the legislation this year for the first time. We're looking forward to implementing it and very, very soon. We know that access to paid family leave is one key way that states can ensure that infants and toddlers get off to a healthy start. Many of you probably already know that, paid family leave boosts the maternal labor force attachment and increase family economic security, as well as improve mental health. I heard good senator referred to that as many families go through this. It fosters better parent and child relationships as well as support health and development. And so we're very proud to be in Maryland. 12 states have already adopted statewide paid family leave programs. 7 have fully implemented these benefits. And this year, both Maryland and Delaware voted to enact the paid family leave. And so we're looking forward, as well as many families here looking to take advantage of the paid family leave.
Senator, thank you so much. And I want to ask each of you maybe and some of you have already hit a little bit on this, but, because we are here in this conversation about the needs of infants and toddlers in particular, a lot of these policy conversations, whether it's the earned income tax credit or, minimum wage, may well not be topics that, the public sort of, that immediately springs to mind, increasing minimum wage has a direct link to the well-being of infants, toddlers, for example. So I want to give each of you just a moment to say a little bit more about kind of the direct link and how you see these policies impacting infants and toddlers and their families. And maybe, Senator San Bonaventura, we can begin with you. I mean, as I mentioned, minimum wage is something probably that people think frequently, that's about, the parent. That's how much, so help us make the link. How is Hawaii increasing minimum wage going to be beneficial in particular to infants and toddlers?
Well, we know that early childhood development helps infants and toddlers, right? So usually the lowest paid worker, and we're all we're all guilty of this, is we pay our babysitters minimum wage or even less. And we consider early childhood educators as those who are just basically babysitting, when in fact, we are entrusting our most treasured possessions, our most treasured lives, really, with these early childhood educators. So we really need to pay them minimum wage. I mean, we really need to pay them well, especially when we are entrusting them with the lives of our kids. And we want to make sure that the people who are taking care of our kids are paid well enough so that they won't be juggling with other stressors, so that they can make ends meet. So that's, to me, a direct link. We want to make sure that the people who take care of our kids get paid well enough so that they do not have to endanger our kids' lives when they end up struggling with other jobs or just to make their ends meet. Thank you.
Senator, thank you, and what a powerful connection that really is, because the child care sector in particular across the country really continues to struggle with this. There is a compensation crisis happening in child care that is leading ultimately to an access crisis and an affordability crisis for families. I don't know if you all saw, but the Washington Post just yesterday published an interesting editorial piece on sort of the need for the country to come together better around the needs of childcare in the country, and they made the link very specifically to the compensation of that workforce. And then, particularly during COVID right now, what we have found is that a lot of fast food restaurants and big box stores and the Amazon and others, have increased their starting wages in a way that childcare has really had difficulty keeping pace. And so, I can speak from the the Hunt Institute's perspective. It's been fascinating to watch. Even with the availability of federal COVID relief dollars right now, through which many states are working to, ideally increase access, for example, to child care subsidy, that many states are struggling, even though they've said, okay, we're going to use these federal dollars to help increase access to families, maybe raise the income floor at the point at which families would qualify. But they've had much more difficulty actually fulfilling that promise, in part because they've had difficulty finding adults to staff these classrooms. We, during, as we came out of sort of the worst part of the onset of the pandemic, the many states restricted enrollment, based on public health concerns, and so maybe a classroom that originally held 20 students now held 10. But as those restrictions have been lifted, we are finding around the country that childcare is really not bouncing back to capacity, and it is really all linked very much, Senator, back to what you're discussing here in terms of the compensation of the workforce. So it's a real challenge, and childcare is really struggling there. So thank you for helping us to make that connection. Senator Bergen, let's talk about the connection. And I know you mentioned a couple of examples as you were introducing, but help us to link North Carolina's Medicaid expansion, again, kind of explicitly to the needs of the youngest children and their families.
And I think part of it, and I want to talk about minimum wage just a minute.
Sure.
I'm a guy, a free market guy, and the effective minimum wage is $15 now. People can say whatever it is. I think the free market drives that. When the local Chick-fil-A's are paying $19 and all of that, and one of my big concerns right now is all states, I think, used a lot of their federal dollars to subsidize child care and nursing homes. And we all have a situation that's coming up next year where we're going to have to figure out how to pay this, because what I've learned in my business career, if you give somebody a raise, you can't take it away from them. So the way they look at it, if you went from $12.25 an hour as a daycare worker to $15, you're not going to go back to $12.25. You're not going to be able to keep people doing that. And we all need to be preparing for that. Now, I like to talk about the threes. I like to talk about the 3 months after conception, the 3 months after birth, the first 3 years in third grade. I want to monitor those kids in those stages and track them, and I think we'll have great outcomes. I am big on, as soon as a woman finds out she's expecting, I want her to have a doctor's appointment. I want her to start on prenatal vitamins, the folic acids, and all that. I've just been talking to the healthcare providers in North Carolina about doula services. I think that I want every child to have the opportunity for a healthy birth and a great life. And one of the things, and I've been talking, I was on a phone call with our Secretary Kinsley in the White House, and I have talked to the Deputy Secretary of DHHS. Something that I'd like to try in North Carolina with Medicaid is to take people that are on Medicaid and give them child care and free community college. because I want Medicaid to be a place where people go for a short time, and then we offer them ways to get them off of Medicaid. I don't want people staying on Medicaid the rest of their lives. I think it's bad for them. I think people want to be self-sufficient, self-reliant, and take care of them and their families. And I don't think a government program that puts somebody in it and leaves them there is fair to anybody involved, especially young children. I want to change the whole mindset of how we look at Medicaid and let it be a temporary service that we give people great care while they're there, provide for them and their families, but give them an avenue to a better life. And I just think we've got to take a different approach and be willing to spend some money to do it. But folks, next year, we've got some issues coming up because I don't think the federal government's going to be able to send us the kind of money they did during the pandemic. And we have to start adjusting. And North Carolina has been really smart to start putting money back for that. We've got a good fund balance right now, one of the best in the country, and I think we're going to be prepared to deal with it.
Senator, thank you, and I love the concept of the threes as well. I'm gonna steal that and attribute it to you everywhere I go.
Just give me credit. You can use it, no charge. Just give me credit.
I love. Senator Hayes, let's turn to you. I sort of set this up by saying, people don't necessarily think of these policies as being related in all cases to infants and toddlers. Paid family leave actually may be a place where that connection is a little bit more natural. And I know that you expanded on this a little bit in your original answer, but take a moment to talk about what's the impact of paid family leave on newborn babies, for example.
No, absolutely, Dan, and thank you for the opportunity. And shout out to my colleague from Hawaii, the senator, for lifting up the child care workers. Most of them, probably in Hawaii, other states, just like they are in Maryland, are female entrepreneurs that just aren't treated as such. And showing them some sense of dignity and making sure that they have the wages is so important. When I first embarked upon the journey of, introducing this legislation before the legislature, I had the awesome responsibility, after all of the safety nets fell from beneath me at an early age, to be raised by my grandmother. And my grandmother, who is one of the strongest people that I've ever known, took care of me even until I matriculated from college. In the later years, she succumbed to Alzheimer's, which then the tables turned. And so we had to take on a responsibility. Myself and a couple of family members had to take on a responsibility of taking care of her care. And so for so many families, whether it's, having a new child or taking care of a loved one, oftentimes they have to make the decision on whether or not to put food on their table or, by going to work or spending time with their loved ones. And I think paid family leave is one of those things that we should be doing as a society, and the rest of the global world have been doing way before we have, and recognizing the importance of, families and the moments that they spend together, even when they're most vulnerable, are important to uplift them. So I'm really excited with our paid family leave bill in Maryland. We expanded the definition of family just to accommodate some of those things. And so we're looking at, whether you have a new child, and then family also, is extended in the version of identifying grandparents as family as well, which, not all of the other leave programs around the state have.
Senator, thank you. And let's move on maybe to another topic. As we're thinking about creating and enacting these kinds of important policies for children and families, certainly the case may be in some states more than others, depending on the partisan makeup. But generally speaking, this is a question of developing bipartisan support where policymakers from across the aisle can come together and unite around these topics. So want to invite each of you to peel back some of the process, maybe, in how this happened in your states, and what advice you have in terms of developing bipartisan supports around the needs of infants and toddlers. And maybe we'll mix up the order too. I think Senator Bergen, it might be interesting to start with you. You mentioned that that North Carolina was one of a handful of states that chose originally not to expand Medicaid, but here you're describing action in the Senate that almost on a unanimous bipartisan basis. At this point, you were able to garner support for doing that. Talk to us a little bit about what broke the logjam, as it were, and what was the impetus for getting to this step where you had such overwhelming support at this point.
Dan, I think part of the problem always was who's on Medicaid. And the statistics show that it was a lot of single people and men, they were in that gap. They didn't make enough they made too much to be on Medicaid, but not enough to get on the affordable health plan. And I'm in the insurance business, so I dealt with this from day one. I'm a CMS contractor, and I do health insurance for multiple companies, and did it. And I'd have people that would come in, and they were in that gap, but the affordable health care we were selling them had such a high deductible that they really the second year a lot of them dropped it. Mm-hmm. So and I tell stories about some of the folks I know. I know a 26-year-old guy right now. He got on drugs when he was in high school. He lives with his grandparents, and he doesn't want to work. I've tried to give him a job. I was going to get him a scholarship to go to community college free, but he doesn't want to work. He wants to just stay there and do what he's doing. And he would be he would go on Medicaid under an expansion. So, and there's stories like that are all around. But I think all of us want to take care of kids. I tell folks I want to take care of children. I want to take care of the elderly, the disabled. I want everybody else to work. I think that it's a blessing to work, and I think that human dignity is derived from hard work. But I don't want to take that away from folks. And the other thing that concerns me right now is the redetermination. The estimate is that we have between 300,000 and 500,000 people on the North Carolina rolls that shouldn't be there because they went on during the pandemic. And we can't take anybody off yet. We won't be able to until the federal government makes up its mind about when this is going to stop. So, when those come off, and then the roughly 600,000 that are estimated to go on, I think we're going to have pretty well stay about the same where we are. It was about 2.7 million people in North Carolina. But think about it. Under Medicaid expansion, if we added 600,000 people, 1/3 of the population of the state of North Carolina would be on Medicaid. Folks, that is not sustainable in the long term. That's why I want people to get jobs. Any business that has 1/3 of its people that aren't showing up for work and are being paid will not survive. So we've got some tough decisions to make. But I think right now we're prepared to do it. We're prepared to work out the details. As I said, I have asked to look at waivers, pilots. I'm willing to try a lot of different things. And the folks that we put through community college program and make sure that they're ready to work, we're going to make sure they've got jobs, because there's plenty of jobs in North Carolina. I told folks the other day, the hot light is on and there's no waiting. So, we got plenty of jobs to give people in North Carolina.
Senator, thank you. Senator Hayes, talk to us a little bit about Maryland's experience as you were working to enact more paid family leave. Was there a partisan divide initially in that conversation? And if so, how did you help to overcome it and unite as lawmakers around this topic?
Yeah, I think the situation in Maryland is a little bit different in that, our legislature and the majority party are Democrats. We have a Republican governor, but we have a super majority in both the House and the Senate. And in the committee that I sit in, that is typically, we almost have consensus on just about everything. This was a contentious issue. And, because many of the businesses in our communities thought that it would be too much of a burden on them. And so we made some slight adjustments to the legislation to afford some ways that especially expressly identifying if a business or employer can show that there was financial harm done to their business, that they could be exempt out. But at the end of the day, we passed the legislation in both the House and the Senate. The governor vetoed the legislation, and we overturned the governor's veto within 24 hours. And so we didn't enjoy the bipartisanship that we wish we would have. But at the end of the day, I believe, especially, in the next upcoming session, we'll have an opportunity to dig further into the details around like some of the percentage and things like that. And so hopefully, I'm optimistic that we'll enjoy a more bipartisan product that everyone can live with.
Senator, thank you. And Senator San Bonaventura, I want to talk a little bit about Hawaii. I mean, you passed not one but three important innovations. Talk to us a little bit about the consensus building process and how you went about getting that moved along politically in Hawaii.
So we are very different from North Carolina. Okay, we only have one Republican in the Senate. And we only have four.
That is very different from North Carolina.
In the House, less than 10%. So it's really the battle wasn't so much on the Medicaid expansions, surprisingly, or even in the earned income tax credit. It was on the minimum wage. And so when you have Democrats controlling both House and Senate, it was actually a fight between the House and the Senate. The more conservative Democrats in the House versus the more liberal Democrats in the Senate. So we were fighting amongst each other. But I think the reality was in the state of Hawaii, like I had said, when our economy hugely expanded, the minimum wage talk wasn't really, the reality was minimum wage in Hawaii was already $15 an hour. I mean, we saw signs over in Burger King and McDonald's because we had such shortage of labor force that they were starting pay was $15, $17 an hour. So it wasn't too much of a stretch to ask the Chamber of Commerce to, since the free market, as Senator Bergen has pointed out, has already shown that minimum wage in the state of Hawaii is higher than what is proposed. Why don't we guarantee it? Why don't we guarantee a floor then? And we've already passed the removal of the sub-minimum wage for disabled workers, which was like unanimous in both House and Senate earlier, that it wasn't much of a stretch, like I said. Again, the fight was amongst the conservative Democrats versus the more liberal Democrats, but, we had a bicameral support, especially with this expansion in our economy. And we hope that the expansion continues. So long as you folks over in the mainland keep coming to Hawaii, we will. So thank you.
Senator Bergen, as we wrap up this particular question, as North Carolina is maybe a little bit more politically diverse than the two other examples, what advice would you have maybe to other policymakers who are watching today around building a sort of consensus across party lines on issues like these?
I think, Dan, the first thing, you got to talk to each other. I have a policy. I'll talk to anybody about anything. And I might not necessarily agree with it, but we've got to be civil too. The days of us shouting at each other and fussing, I tell folks all the time, I want to be seen as a statesman who is civil. I think civility is so important. And we need to show each other some mercy and grace, because there are going to be things we're going to be passionate about. I'm passionate about mental health. I want us to, as a society, to say, we got to deal with mental health. I'm passionate about young people not using drugs. We've got to figure out smartly how to convince them not to even try drugs. I talked to a mother just before 5 minutes before this started. A mother was telling me about her 19-year-old son that had passed away from a drug overdose. And those things, as here again, as a person of faith, those things really concern me. We've got to talk about a lot of folks right now are facing hopelessness and helplessness. Those two words in our society very concern me. I hear it from young people a lot, especially young people that attempt suicide, talking about hopelessness. And then a lot of the older folks, I hear them talking about a sense of helplessness. So I encourage all of my colleagues, let's talk. We're smart. We can figure these things out. We need to have a vision for what we want our states to look like. But I want North Carolina to be first in health. So I challenge my colleagues. And I was in Hawaii earlier in the year in Maui, and she knows that, and had a great time. I helped with their taxes over there. So I expect all of them to come to North Carolina to the beach. I'm at Wrightsville Beach at this convention right now. So come to the beach. We have some nice beaches in North Carolina and spend that money from the state of Hawaii.
As a fellow citizen of the Carolinas, Senator, I echo your desire. We've got just a couple of minutes left before we turn things back over to Cynthia for the next portion of the program, and I want to spend that time really thinking ahead toward the future. We are all here as guests of the Prenatal-to-3 Policy Impact Center today in this conversation, and so I am always thinking the roadmap is such a powerful document that where they have laid out these evidence-based policies, for the good of infants and toddlers. But Senator Bergen also referenced early on specifically the challenge that states may encounter here as we're winding down, the expenditure of one-time federal dollars that have been allocated to the states, as part of the COVID relief packages. What do you see as next, maybe, and maybe can give you a 2 minutes or so apiece to see, sort of looking into the future, what do you see as next steps in your state in terms of advancing these policies for infants and toddlers in this context? And Senator San Bonaventura, why don't we start with you this time?
Okay, so next steps, like I said, I really want to ensure that our child care workers and early learning educators are going to continue to be compensated, and not just with the ARPA monies that we got or the block grant monies that we got from the federal government. So one of the ideas I'm trying to get our both chambers to agree to is basically offer some kind of grant with an employer match to ensure that childcare near the workplace will start happening. Okay, so that way we could have, hopefully, we could have the synergy of helping employers get employees. We have a huge shortage, by the way, in the state of Hawaii. We don't have enough of everybody. We don't have enough police officers. We don't have enough educators. We don't have enough service workers. So, but there is this pool of parents who cannot work when they cannot entrust their kids. So I'm hoping that that's going to be one of my next steps, would be to see whether or not we can have a public-private partnership to ensuring that childcare and the childcare workforce will continue to be paid well by having an employer match and not just a government match, and not just their minimum wage to continue working. And of course, I want to follow through and make sure that, that all of these incentives we brought up this past year will continue to hold forth. Like, I want to see whether or not my child wellness bill, which hopefully will catch all those who are homeschooled, will have eyes on their kids to ensure that there's no abuse and no lack of nutrition. Okay. So right now in the state of Hawaii, we have, at least on my island, because we are in a rural community, all of our lunches and breakfasts, so long as they go to school, are paid for. So we want to make sure that this nutrition follows through also on homeschooled kids. So that's my wish.
Senator, thank you. Let's turn to Maryland. Senator Hayes, looking into your crystal ball here in terms of next steps for our youngest children in Maryland. What do you see on the horizon as next steps for Maryland?
No, I think for us, workforce is definitely similar. Is going to be an issue. It's going to be a challenge. As you know, the pandemic have changed kind of the workplace as we know it. A lot of people are choosing to work in a home environment a lot more, and so we're going to have to see what impact that may have on if folks decide to take care of their own home. What does that look like for our young people and with parents working at home and kids there? And so that's going to be a huge challenge for us and trying to in a post-pandemic environment to see how do we operate moving forward, and what does the workplace look like is definitely going to be our biggest challenge.
Senator, thank you. And Senator Bergen, we'll turn to North Carolina and give you the last word. What do you see on the horizon for infants and toddlers in the Tar Heel State?
We're investing money. We've invested $20 million in capital grants for startup for North Carolina pre-K and for child care centers. I think we've got to look at how to do more with child care. I want to start child care centers on every community college campus. We have 58 community colleges. If we have child care at every community college, parents can take their kids there and go to school and eventually get to where they can pay for their kids to be in programs. I think we ought to look at putting child care centers in nursing homes. We need workers in nursing homes. If we've got parents that put the child care there, plus older people love kids. And I think it's good for children to be around older people. Some of my best memories are being around my grandparents all the time. And so I just think we here again, we need to be thoughtful on how we approach things and be willing to try new things that help everybody.
And Senator, there are some wonderful intergenerational child care programs around the country. We'd love to help you to connect with those. Well, Senator Jim Bergen of North Carolina, State Senator Joyce San Buenaventura of Hawaii, and Senator Antonio Hayes of Maryland. First off, thank you for the work that you do, and thank you for your leadership on behalf of the youngest citizens of your state. And second, thank you for taking the time out to participate in this conversation today. We have learned a lot, and it's been terrific to be with you. And Dr. Osborne, a great conversation. And I think at this point we'll turn things back over to you for the next phase of the program.
Wow. Well, thank you, Dan, and thank you to all of you. I cannot tell you how grateful I am to hear all that you're doing and the energy that you have. And Dan, your words that you said at the end were pretty much the exact words that I was going to say. Just so grateful for you to share your insights and expertise and for the valuable work that you do in championing efforts to support our children and families in your states. And I'm just really appreciative of that. So thank you. So let's turn now to the roadmap strategies. States made considerable headway on implementing the 6 effective strategies that are included in the roadmap. Now, strategies have strong evidence that they work to improve prenatal-to-3 policy goals. However, the research is less clear on how states should actually implement the strategies to make it so that they can be brought to scale and really maximize their impact. So for strategies, we don't indicate whether a state has fully implemented or not with a yes or a no, the way that we do with policies. Instead, we've identified 5 states for each strategy that we call leaders or states to watch. It was extremely difficult to narrow the selection to 5 states because there is such great work going on across this country. But we made our decisions based on a combination of several elements, including such things as the state is bringing the strategy to scale and serving a large number of eligible children, or the state uses innovative funding strategies, or the state made substantial investments in the strategy in this past year. And so states that are interested in expanding their implementation of a specific strategy should look to these leaders for and see what they have done for guidance on what you can do. Extensive information on what each of these states is doing is available in each state's summary in the roadmap and in the profiles for each strategy. But let's take a moment to celebrate the leaders and also recognize the efforts of many states towards expanding these effective strategies. So let's begin with comprehensive screening and connection programs. These evidence-based programs use screening tools to identify the needs of children and families and connect them to the targeted programs and services that they actually need. And state leaders in this strategy either have a high percentage of families who access the programs, they've enacted legislation to reach families across the state, or they've invested deeply in evidence-based programs. So this year, we'd like to recognize California for being the only state that offers all three of the universal evidence-based models that are in the roadmap. We also want to recognize Colorado, Connecticut, New Jersey, and Oregon for their efforts in implementing the Family Connects model statewide. Also, this past year, New York made a substantial investment in the Healthy Steps model, which supplements the child's pediatric well visits with a developmental specialist who assesses the needs of the family and makes sure that those needs are addressed. And there are several other states, including New Mexico, Tennessee, Iowa, Hawaii, Minnesota, Massachusetts, Kentucky, and Rhode Island, who offer their own alternative model to universally screening families and connecting them with services. And their programs seem very promising. And what we're doing is watching and hoping that these program models are rigorously evaluated so that we can provide even more evidence-based options to states. Next is group prenatal care. And group prenatal care provides education, support, and obstetric care to pregnant people with similar gestational age in a group setting. And state leaders in this strategy offer financial support for group prenatal care. They provide enhanced reimbursement rates for group prenatal care through Medicaid, or they serve pregnant people in a high number of group prenatal care sites across the state. Selected state leaders include California, Maryland, Montana, Ohio, and South Carolina. In particular, Maryland made an investment of $72 million in Maryland Medicaid to implement the centering pregnancy model throughout the state, which is really impressive. Next is evidence-based home visiting programs. These programs provide support and education to new parents in their home through either a trained professional or a paraprofessional. And state leaders in this strategy serve a substantial percentage of low-income families with young children, and they use state dollars or Medicaid to support home visiting services. We want to recognize the state leaders of Illinois, Iowa, Kansas, Maine, and New York. Well done to those states. But there were other states that made investments that's important to recognize. For example, California and Illinois both passed legislation to expand resources to families in the programs this past year. And Rhode Island, Washington, Arkansas, and New Hampshire all increased their funding for home visiting programs. And Ohio became the 24th state to begin using Medicaid to fund portions of home visiting services. It began incorporating home visiting programs into its targeted case management benefits. So good job. Next is Early Head Start. As we know, Early Head Start serves our low-income pregnant people, as well as infants and toddlers and their families through comprehensive child development and family services, which can be delivered in a variety of formats. And state leaders in this strategy have a state-specific program that has the same standards as Early Head Start. They provide state financial support for Early Head Start, or they serve a substantial percentage of their low-income children. And we want to recognize the District of Columbia, Maine, Massachusetts, Nebraska, and Oregon for their efforts in Early Head Start. Nebraska and Oregon have their own state-specific program that's modeled on Early Head Start standards. DC and Maine serve a large proportion of their eligible children in the program. And Massachusetts and Oregon made substantial investments in Early Head Start this past year. Massachusetts invested in the EHS workforce, and Oregon increased the number of state-funded slots by nearly 25%. So congratulations to all of those states. Next is early intervention services, and these are child and family-centered services and therapies that support the healthy development of infants and toddlers who have disabilities or developmental delays or who are at risk for delays. And state leaders in this strategy serve a substantial percentage of children under age 3. They use innovative approaches to increase their eligibility for children, or they maximize the use of Medicaid to pay for EI services. And congratulations to the leaders in early intervention, who are Connecticut, Illinois, Massachusetts, New Mexico, and Rhode Island. California, Delaware, New Jersey, and Pennsylvania also took legislative or administrative action to enhance their EI services this past year. And it's really important to see the number of children who are served expand. Finally, are child care subsidies. And child care subsidies provide financial assistance to help make child care more affordable for working parents who have lower levels of income. State leaders in this strategy provide high reimbursement rates that meet the provider's true cost of care. They require low family copays and have a low family share of the total cost of child care. Or they have expanded income eligibility thresholds. Now, states have made incredible progress on this strategy this past year, which I'm going to discuss in more detail in just a minute. But 5 states that are really leading the pack include California, Louisiana, Michigan, New Mexico, and Oregon. Boy, this list was very difficult to limit to 5 states because so many states are making innovative policy changes. But we wanted to recognize and congratulate these exceptional leaders. So although we recognize 5 exemplar states for each of the strategies, it's important to point out that 2 states, California and Washington, they were considered leaders in 3 of the roadmap strategies. So California was a leader in our comprehensive screening and connection programs, our child care subsidy policies, and in group prenatal care. And Oregon is a state leader in comprehensive screening and connection programs, child care subsidies, and early Head Start. So those states, along with Washington, who became a 5 out of 5, well, they show us that great things are happening for children and families on the West Coast. 5 additional states are leaders in 2 of the strategies. And that includes Connecticut, Illinois, Massachusetts, Maine, and New Mexico. And congratulations for your excellent work. And others should look to you to really understand how they can implement these strategies. There are 14 states that were leaders in at least one of the roadmap strategies. And so altogether, we're recognizing 21 states as leaders in at least one of the effective strategies. And this includes large states and small states and red and blue states and from all of the geographic regions across the country, really illustrating the impressive work to support children and families that's being done throughout the United States. As I mentioned, states were incredibly active this past year in enhancing their child care subsidy policies. As we know, subsidies provide an essential resource to families to help them access affordable child care. And research shows that higher subsidy reimbursement rates, they increase employment, and they lead to greater stability in child care arrangements. But too frequently, reimbursement rate levels are set below the amount that would be necessary for families to be able to access high quality care or for child care providers to pay their teachers a living wage. And state leaders in child care subsidies are setting their rates at levels that cover the true cost of care, and they have reasonable expectations of what the family can pay in copays. And this combination of these 2 policies lead to families being responsible for a relatively small percentage of the overall price of care. Although most of the funding for child care subsidies comes from federal sources, states have substantial latitude in how they implement their programs. And over the past year, states made many improvements to their child care systems by either executive order or agency actions. And several states passed legislation to expand eligibility, increase reimbursement rates, cap family copayments, and other things. So in total, 17 states expanded the income threshold that makes families eligible for child care subsidies. The federal government sets 85% of a state's median income as the eligibility threshold for using federal funds, but state dollars, states can use state dollars to increase the eligibility beyond that level, and some do. In fact, income eligibility thresholds range from 140% of the state median income in New Mexico to only 40% of the state median income in Indiana. We also saw that 15 states reduced the required copayments that families have to pay to access the subsidized slots. This year, families with incomes at 150% of the federal poverty level pay nothing or nearly nothing in co-payments in 11 states. And that's a huge improvement over last year. We also saw that 35 states worked to support providers and families by increasing the reimbursement rates this year. Louisiana really led those efforts by nearly doubling its reimbursement rates and reducing the overall family share of childcare costs. But Michigan also significantly increased its reimbursement rates and decreased the amount charged to families in the state this year. And there are 3 states, DC, New Mexico, and now Virginia, that have moved toward a model of setting reimbursement rates that's based on the true cost of providing quality childcare rather than the market rate survey. And this model is expected to increase rates and ultimately wages for childcare educators. And we are seeing that several other states are considering moving in this direction. Okay, this graphic, it illustrates the wide variation across states in their childcare policies. I realize that these numbers are way too small to see any particular state. It's in the roadmap, though. But this figure shows how the market price for childcare varies substantially across states. The length of the bar is that equal access target for childcare subsidies, which the federal government defines as the 75th percentile of a recent market rate survey. And despite the enormous improvements to reimbursement rates and copays in many states, there is still substantial variation in the amount that providers charge families for care and the amount that states will reimburse providers to offer subsidized childcare. That first blue bar, that's the amount that the state pays providers directly. And the navy is the amount of the base reimbursement rate that the state requires that families have to pay for a subsidized slot, or the copay. The teal bar is the additional amount, or the fee, that families have to pay in order to access that equal access target, or the quality target. And that fee plus the Navy copay adds up to a family's out-of-pocket childcare expenses. So for more information, I really do encourage you to check out all of the graphics in the child care subsidy profile that's in the roadmap. And I want to also note that we recognize that several states have updated the reimbursement rates even as of October 1st, and we're going to update that information over time to reflect these changes. But in order to get all of this done, this information in the roadmap was current for all states as of early September. In recognition of the immense challenges that the childcare market is facing, we chose to focus the following panel on just that issue alone. We not only, though, want to highlight the crisis that the market is facing in terms of providers not being able to charge enough to break even, educators not earning enough to live, and families not able to afford quality care, we also wanted to spotlight how state leaders are championing innovative solutions to address this crisis. So first, I was fortunate to have the opportunity to speak with Elliot Haskell, who's a national childcare expert, and he's currently in Europe to learn about childcare there. I spoke with him about how the U.S. childcare system is irrecoverably broken, and the only solution is for sustainable public investments in the system. So I invite you now to listen in on our conversation. Thanks so much for joining me today and having this conversation about this hugely important topic that we know so many states are struggling with. Our childcare market is really in crisis. And I'd love for you to help me and all of us better understand what is really going on with our childcare system right now.
Thanks so much for having me. And I'm sorry I couldn't be there in person. So the childcare system, which as we know was pretty fragile before the pandemic, has been absolutely shattered by the pandemic. And that's hitting providers, that's hitting parents, that's hitting the childcare businesses themselves. And so, just for some context, we've seen still that the childcare industry is down about 85,000 educators from February or March of 2020. And that is across the board in all sorts of different settings. And the Along with that, we've seen over 16,000 childcare providers close down permanently, and those numbers are as of summer 2021. So it's actually probably significantly higher than that. And we've seen childcare become far more expensive. So it was already obviously exorbitantly expensive for parents, but childcare prices have been rising actually faster than inflation, even in this inflationary era. And part of the reason behind this is we've seen the very sort of tenuous economics of childcare be completely blown up, right? So we already knew childcare fixed costs incredibly high. And that should be, right? So it should be expensive to provide quality care when you have low child to adult ratios, when you need to have high quality facilities. And the only way that providers were able to balance their budgets was frankly on the backs of the wages of the workforce.
Yeah.
And so we had, making $12, $13 an hour as a median wage. And that was bad. And back in the day when you could compete against the Walmarts and McDonald's of the world also offering $12 or $13 an hour, at least there was like a playing field. But there isn't a playing field anymore because those industries have all gone and raised their base compensation, which we should say is great for workers and they should be getting compensated more for that work. But now when Amazon, Target, Walmart, McDonald's, all of these businesses are offering, $17, $18 an hour and decent benefits. It's almost impossible for childcare businesses to compete. And so when you're down workers, as we know, it has this negative vicious cycle where you're putting additional pressure on the staff to remain. So we have studies out of places like Louisiana, Virginia, other states showing, that directors are being forced to ask workers to work longer hours, to not take vacation, right? And in many cases, the directors themselves are being pressed into service as classroom teachers, as cooks, to let the operate. And so you hear this refrain, which we've really not heard very much before the pandemic, which is we have classroom space and they're sitting empty with the lights off and the chairs stacked because there's no one to staff them. And at some point, that creates a budgetary death spiral. I mean, you just aren't bringing enough revenue every month to keep the lights on. And so we're seeing, programs, and again, this is urban area, rural areas, blue states, red states, everywhere, these harrowing stories of programs who've been serving their communities for decades saying, I can't do it anymore. And it's devastating, again, for those programs. It's devastating for the staff, and it's devastating for parents and kids.
Yes. And it's also devastating for some of the economies and the workers who would like to get back into the workplace, but are having a hard time finding a place to leave their children, much less at a place that they trust. Tell us more about what you're seeing that states could do to actually try to shore up this childcare crisis. We know that states are implementing a variety of policies and making changes in several different domains. What have you seen that seems to be working for states and helping to stabilize the market?
Yeah, it's a great question. So in my mind, I have to do multiple things at once. You have to handle the affordability issue for parents. You have to handle quality issues, but workforce looms as the single largest issue right now. And so I like to say it's not so much a both and as a first then. Getting this workforce stabilized is really the prerequisite because you can make it as affordable as you want, but at some point you're handing parents a voucher to nowhere. Because there just are no slots, there are wait lists, right? The programs are going to, again, quality is suffering because there's so much turnover. We know high levels of staff turnover and caregiver turnover is bad for kids. And so when I do think states are trying to stabilize their workforce, we've seen lots of states give out these short-term bonuses. And, I think that's good. But I think we really have to have a conversation about the need for permanent significant increases in public funding that allow programs to offer permanently raised compensation. You talk to directors and you hear this refrain frequently, like, I really don't want to raise my, wages and then 2 years later have to go back down. Or how do I handle the issue of trying to attract new staff without, the current staff also deserve raises as well? And so it creates these really nasty tensions because we're relying on temporary funding. So we've seen a few states, New Mexico has done this, Washington, D.C., while not a state jurisdiction, has done this. Virginia is prepared to do this, which is changing their cost models. So going more to a true cost of care reimbursement rate, which in some cases is very significant increases, $50, $100, $150 more per child per week type of increases. And that you can actually start to reframe a compensation model around. We've seen some states start to talk about potentially implementing wage scales, right? So you'd have a flat level, you're not going below a floor of a certain wage. And as you increase in experience and credentials, you step up. And so those sorts of structural compensation, structural workforce solutions are really going to be prerequisites for any other attempt to stabilize the sector.
Yeah, the temporary supplements may not be enough to, like you said, to keep folks in the industry. But how are states going to manage this over the long haul? As we know, the ARPA dollars will be drying up in a couple of years. And there are states who are definitely using those in a generous way. Have you seen states that are making real changes to their funding structures that might be more sustainable?
Yeah, so I think this is literally the several $100 million question. It's how do you create a sustainable revenue source? And I do actually say, from my perspective, I think a lot of states are or politicians are not taking the cliff seriously enough. And what I mean by that is, and I think their state's doing really bold efforts to try to help working families and try to stabilize the sector in an emergency. And I understand that. But when you're relying on $500 million a year of ARPA money, for the next 2 years, and that's going away, and 2025 is going to be here a lot sooner than we think it is. If there's not a plan, there is going to be a crisis. And it's not an unintended consequence. It's not an unpredictable consequence. It is a known consequence that I think we have to be prepared to plan for. And so, again, you look at what New Mexico is proposing before their voters this fall. It's a constitutional amendment to dedicate a portion of their natural resource revenues into that, right? You look at what Colorado did with their Prop EE, dedicating some of their nicotine and tax to revenue to early childhood. Washington D.C., where they're raising taxes on the high net worth individuals, dedicating some. So the theme here is they're recurring resources, right? They're not going away. They're there every single year, and they're being dedicated. So they're not at the whims of a given General Assembly session or legislature session. They're not at the whims of a given gubernatorial administration. Because what we've seen in many other areas is that could look great, and then the economy hits a downturn. We're going to pull that away, right? That's not how we fund public education. It's not how we fund, transportation. In most cases, they tend to have their own kind of carve outs, and I think that has to be the route that states take moving forward. What is going to be our dedicated funding source? What is going to generate, hundreds of millions of dollars, knowing that it's an investment? That's the other piece, I think, is we need to start talking about this much more. We're not talking about just a bottomless pit like throwing money into. We know because of the economic benefits of parents, especially mothers working. We know because of the economic benefits of the business productivity. We know because of the economic benefits of the childcare sector itself produces quite a bit of money, right? That actually states will make money pretty quickly if they invest this funds. The other thing is obviously at some point, federal funding has to get unlocked. States have different levels of resources and different levels of tax bases, and it's simply unfair to say to a family or a child the quality and access to early care and education is going to depend on the zip code you happen to live in, and so the only way to smooth that over truly is going to at some point be federal funding. I sincerely hope that's sooner rather than later, but I think that still remains to be seen.
Yeah. No, I think that seeing that for the public good that it is and making this investment is going to be the key to sustaining this. And at the end of the day, we're doing this so that we're improving the lives of these children who are in nurturing environments and high quality care. And we know that has long-term payoffs for their health and well-being in the short term and the long term. Well, I can't thank you enough for taking time to talk with me today and to share what you have seen and really have come to be a leader in helping all of us better understand how important it is that we shore up the childcare market and make it so that our teachers will enter and stay in this important field. And at the end of the day, make sure that our families can afford high quality care for their children, and that our providers can stay in business. So Elliot, thank you again for your time today.
Thank you so much for having me.
Well, Elliot's message was clear. State leaders need to be prepared to do big things and make substantial investments in order to fix the child care system. Well, today we are honored to be hearing from two state legislators who have championed unique policy solutions to increase funding for and to improve oversight and to diversify the provision of child care in their states. Senator Freiberg from Louisiana is one of our guests. Louisiana made incredible gains in terms of its investments in child care subsidy programs this past year, including dedicated funding to early childhood through allocating 25% of their sports betting revenue to an early childhood fund. And we're also joined by Senator Fields from Colorado, and she's been an advocate for improving and expanding upon the availability of child care providers and sponsored a Family, Friends, and Neighbor bill that was enacted this past year to ensure that informal child care providers are high quality and meeting the needs of families. And moderating this panel is Bridget Roman. She's a member of Ready Nation, a membership organization consisting of over 2,000 business executives who are committed to building a skilled workforce by promoting solutions that prepare children to succeed in education, work, and life. Bridget's also an attorney, currently serving as the Chief Legal Officer for Community Choice Financial. Bridget's going to share the business case for investing in early childhood and in childcare specifically. We know that childcare is essential for the workforce of today and in building the workforce for tomorrow. And thank you all for joining us. And now I'll turn it over to you, Bridget.
Thank you, Cynthia. I appreciate that and your kind words. Before we get to hear from our very accomplished panelists, I wanted to start the discussion of the business case with a quote from, a paraphrase of a quote from Nelson Mandela. He said, "Our children are our greatest treasure. They are our future. If we fail to care for them, to feed them, to keep them safe, we tear at the fabric of our society and we weaken our nation." Any business case for bettering early childhood care is really born out of those types of sentiments. In the video that you just saw with Elliot Haspel, you heard essentially the three things that are incredibly difficult to overcome. And our panelists will talk about how they went about assisting with overcoming those challenges. But Elliot Haspel spoke about the expense. He spoke about the scarcity of childcare availability, and particularly those childcare deserts. And he spoke to the quality of childcare. And if you think back to that paraphrase that I just read to you, wasn't President Mandela telling us precisely that we need to invest in our children so that we aren't weakening our nation or the fabric of our society? And that is the essence of the business case. Yes, it's too expensive. Infant and toddler care costs are more than in-state tuition at a public university in 34 states. The scarcity issue is real. We have half of America living in childcare deserts, where kids who need childcare outnumber licensed slots by 3-1, or maybe even worse. And then quality. Only 11% of childcare nationwide is accredited. We need to address these issues because the children are the fabric of our society, and we don't want a weak nation. Business relies on the strength of both of those things, but we have over 11 million parents with children younger than 3 who need quality childcare and simply don't have access to it. That lack of access to affordable, high-quality care costs our economy $57 billion every year. And that's just for parents of infants and toddlers. That $57 billion number is comprised of essentially 3 component parts. $7 billion in lost tax revenue, $13 billion lost by business due to lower productivity, and increased hiring and training costs. $37 billion lost by parents due to their weakened career prospects, their inability to work as many hours as they'd like, or having to leave the workforce altogether. The childcare crisis hurts our workforce today because parents are understandably distracted by or even absent from the workplace when they're not distracted. And it hurts tomorrow. Young children who don't have high quality early support can experience worse educational and life outcomes, especially when you consider that the children in the age group we're talking about are in a unique period of brain development. Companies need to focus their energies, their efforts, and their resources on getting skilled workers, and skilled workers need reliable, quality childcare that they can afford. There was an article in Forbes in March of this year that told a better story than one that I can tell, that about Helen Meyer, the mother of twin boys. In March of 2020, when the pandemic hit, Meyer's startup company failed, and simultaneously, the childcare provider for her twins shut down. She became a stay-at-home mom, not because she wanted to, but because she had to. She started to apply for jobs, but had to turn down opportunities because she found that access to childcare was either not safe, not reliable, and certainly not of the quality she expected. She started researching childcare to better understand why a generation of parents, mothers in particular, were fleeing the workforce. In July of 2020, Meyer reached out to several parenting communities and asked for some input on childcare solutions that they were seeking. She received 2,000 responses in 1 week. By October of 2020, she had started a business called Otter. It's an online platform to link parents with quality childcare providers. By January of 2021, Otter had launched in a second city and onboarded its 1,000th caregiver. By July, Otter was serving 3,500 providers. The childcare crisis predates the global pandemic. Childcare was already unaffordable for 63% of parents. Half of families, as we already discussed, live in childcare deserts. 1 in 3 working families struggle to find childcare. And only 10% of that childcare is quality. Bottom line, and we're going to see this and hear this from our 2 panelists, childcare is a bipartisan issue. Policymakers like Senator Fields and Representative Freiberg, whom you'll hear from shortly, understand that we need to invest in childcare so that the cost to working parents are reduced. There are more slots for kids and greater availability in more areas, especially the rural ones, and quality is incentivized. So with that, and in the vein of bipartisanism, we do have 1 Democrat and 1 Republican. It's not important who's who, because both of them recognize that the important issue here is the kids. It's the fabric of our society and the future of our nation. So with that, as we already heard, Rhonda Fields is a state senator in the Colorado legislature. She served 3 terms in the Colorado House of Representatives before being elected to the Senate in 2016. And Representative Barbara Freiberg serves in the Louisiana state legislature. Prior to her election to the legislature, she taught high school for 30 years. So she was on the front lines of seeing the importance of early childhood opportunities. And she also served on a local school board. So welcome to both of you. And I'd like to start by inviting each one of you to talk about the child care incentives available in your respective states, and what you did and why you did it. So Senator Fields, may we begin with you?
Yes, thank you so very much for having me. It's so good to be a part of this discussion as we talk about kids and families, because I can tell you right now, families are struggling. Ever since COVID, we've seen many women kind of leave the workplace because it's hard for them to, let's say, homeschool because schools were closed, or even to get back to work. And so in the state of Colorado, we've done lots of things to kind of get relief and subsidies to families, but we have not done enough. One of the things that I'm proud of is Senate Bill 1295, which just passed this year, which was able to invest more dollars into providing subsidies, not only for the daycare locations, but also for training and development for those that do the kind of work. As you know, the workers, the people that are in these centers don't make a lot of money. In fact, you can probably work somewhere else at, let's say, Home Depot or maybe Starbucks and make more than some of these childcare workers are making. So we need to invest in increasing their salary, their certification, as well as in getting more opportunities for us to have facilities in homes. Rural Colorado is really impacted by the lack of accessibility to childcare in the state. So some of the funding that we put in 1295, make sure that we try to address accessibility and affordability, especially in rural Colorado. So our governor, who really helps, has started this about 4 years ago, investing in our early learners as it relates to full day kindergarten. It's hard for you to be at work and then you have to leave at 2:00 to pick up your kids. So now for the last 4 years, we now have funded 4-day kindergarten. And we've also invested in preschool education to make sure that kids are getting a good head start so they know their alphabets and their numbers and the letters before they go to kindergarten. So there's lots of work to be done, but families are still struggling because of the wages and because of the affordability of housing and trying to make all ends meet. Sometimes our kids are cut short because their parents or those families cannot afford the cost of childcare.
Representative Freiberg, what about you? Can you talk a little bit about the Louisiana experience?
Absolutely. I am thrilled to be here this afternoon with y'all, Bridget. We have worked very hard in our state to try and make some improvements in early childhood. I've got to tell you, back when I first ran for school board, I came out of the secondary environment, as you just mentioned a little while ago. But my daughter said, "Why would you want to run for school board?" And I said, "Because I would like us to have universal early childhood education for everyone." And she said, "Mom, that's never going to happen. You can't do that." And I said, if I didn't think I couldn't do it, I wouldn't be running. I'm running because I think I can. So that is one of the primary goals I've had in every elected position I've held. I left the school board to go to the Metro Council to try and work on some early childhood things, got that done. And now I am in the legislature trying to continue that process so that I can keep my promise to my daughter. I hope I live long enough to do that. I will tell you that I am on the Education Committee. So most of the legislation that deals with this, except for the budgetary things, does come through education. I want to back up a little bit and set the stage. Back in 2012, our legislature passed legislation that put all early care and early education programs under the Department of Education. In 2013, they established a community network in every single community in the state. In 2015, they put in a rating system that was a little bit controversial, but anyone who accepts public dollars now has to be rated as an early care center. We established in 2018 the Early Childhood Care and Education Commission, and it has really made a difference in our state. They're the ones who collect the data. They create proposals for the legislature. They are trying to expand access for all children birth to 3 in our state. In 2019, we started a larger network, the Ready Start Network, to expand access again. So let me talk about last year's session. It was an historic session. And just as Elliot mentioned earlier, I don't know if we're all real prepared for that that fiscal cliff that's coming. But here's what we did. As someone already mentioned, 25% of sports betting up to $20 million will go to early childhood. All parishes are allowed to repurpose juvenile justice funding to include preventative services such as increasing access to early care and education, and investing in early care and education infrastructure. Another bill put $44 million in state funding to improve early care education, $25 million to expand our CCAP program, which is for our at-need children, and around $18 million to improve the rates offered to existing four-year-old programs. We put $40 million of unspent money that we had in the general budget into the Early Childhood Education Fund, but that's one-time money, and we'll have to find $40 million next year if we're going to fill that gap. We had legislation that maybe is still good. I hope districts will listen, but it requires school districts to work toward offering year-round, full-day pre-kindergarten to all four-year-olds. And finally, we reauthorized this commission that I told you is so important, our Early Childhood Care and Education Commission. So we made a huge down payment this year on what we hope will be a very positive future and just the beginning of bigger and better things for our state.
Representative Freiberg, that was a very interesting timeline, but I'm curious, was there something that set in motion and triggered the legislator into action for the benefit of younger children?
I believe it was the business community who said, as we've talked about earlier, we have jobs that need to be filled. We have areas in our state that just have to be propped up by better education access. And I can tell you that, early childhood education is that foundation, like a house. And if that foundation isn't strong, then we can't get our students to the place that we want them to be. And this reliable workforce probably was the key to saying, we've got to start early. There was a former chancellor of the higher ed in our state who famously always said, college begins in kindergarten. Well, we would say college begins at birth, and that's what we're working toward.
Interesting. And Senator Fields, what about in Colorado? Was there a trigger event or series of events that pushed the legislature into action?
Yeah, I think that education has always been a core value in the state of Colorado. And so when I think about what triggers some of the recent events, it has to be the governor. The governor, when he ran, his platform was all about focusing in on kids and families and learning and starting early and working upstream to prevent some of our kids who may be troubled getting into our criminal justice system. So in the past 5 years, he's gotten lots of momentum for us to invest in early learning and anything that supports student success. So we have lots of dollars that we funded all over to just making sure that we're doing right by kids. And so it's not a political focus in Colorado. It's all about making sure that we're preparing young people to take their places in the future tomorrow.
And Representative Freiberg, you mentioned that the business community triggered some of the actions in Louisiana. How can the business community most effectively push for these sorts of legislative changes and get the message out about how important early childhood development is to future members of the workforce, future collegiate students, to all sorts of future endeavors?
That's a good question, and I'm going to answer it the best I can. I'm going to start with a quote from Ronald Reagan. Ronald Reagan once said, "Status quo, is Latin for the mess we're in." We were in a mess, and our mess was driving people out of our state because the economy was not good. Businesses couldn't find qualified people. Our education system in Louisiana ranks 49th in quality, 40th for safety, 47th for dropouts, 47th for the median ACT scores. We have 60% of our kindergartners entering kindergarten not ready to learn. We must do a better job if we're going to ever feed the pipeline at the other end. Now, I would tell you that we have chambers throughout the state who have been very involved in this process. We have the Louisiana Association of Business and Industry, which is also very involved. And for better or worse, they have a very strong lobby. And their lobbyists are all over the legislature. And Lobby, Louisiana Association of Business and Industry, has a very strong platform that embraces education, birth through college, basically. And so the push from these folks helps to push legislators and even the governor to do things to try and solve the problem. We probably have 83% of our 4-year-olds that are served. These are 4-year-olds that are in need, but less than 15%, goes back to some of the statistics you were quoting earlier, less than 15% of those children who are birth to 3 and in need have access. So we have a long way to go.
And Senator Fields, I'm curious, are you seeing a similar interest from business leaders in the state of Colorado?
Yes, we are. I can tell you the comments that are being made are similar to what we see in Colorado. The business community is extremely engaged in education because that transfers into labor, into the production of our economy. Because without a skilled workforce or labor, no one is really making that kind of money. And what we're seeing in Colorado, everyone's looking for labor. I mean, you can't drive around without seeing a for hire sign. And there's people who are not working. And what I'm told from business community is that they believe that we need to provide more childcare opportunities. So we're seeing them take the initiative in private partnerships with the state to develop facilities within those companies. So we have, like, some of the schools are now building childcare centers. Some of the hospitals. We're just seeing more and more opportunities where we're seeing collaboration between business as it relates to the need of childcare for families, because it affects all workforces. You can be a doctor, a nurse, or a janitorial worker or a teacher. And if you have kids and you want to pursue your career, on everyone's mind as a parent is making sure they have access to quality care. And we just don't have enough to meet the need and the demand that's out there right now.
Senator Fields, Representative Freiberg talked about something I thought was interesting, which is the dedication of streams of money from, in her state's case, it was gambling, I believe. Right. Is Colorado considering a similar dedication of funds?
Well, that was interesting. I did take note of that because I would like to snatch some of that money as well. We would call that here sin tax because we're always looking to tax, let's say, alcohol or sugar or something like that. It's not very popular. When we do that, no one wants to see increase of taxes. But we have to find a revenue stream and we have to make better and bigger and stronger investments in childcare. So I'm interested in that. What we did do with some of the money that we got from the feds is that we were able to repurpose some of the funds and the rebates that went to folks that were incarcerated. And we redirected some of those funds. So there are some opportunities for us to look creatively in reference to how we can funnel more money to help in this endeavor.
Well, even though there's work to be done, do we think that we're close in Colorado and Louisiana to solving or being en route to solving the crisis?
Well, I'll just speak since I started talking. I just think it's an issue that we just can't ignore anymore. I mean, when you see that people are spending the cost of it, what it would cost for a mortgage payment or a quarter semester of tuition for childcare, it's just heartbreaking when you want to see families, kind of contribute to society and do the work, but yet they can't because their focus is on the development and the well-being of their children. So we have to get all the right minds and the people in the same space so that we can come up with, solutions and strategies to move forward. Because right now, I believe we're getting close to that cliff.
And Representative Pfeiffer, any comments along those lines?
Well, yes, it was interesting. Someone said something to me the other day about, children are not like, investing in children's not like a capital outlay project in the legislature, because capital outlay is a one-time money and you fix the problem. With children, it's not one-time money and we fix the problem. It's money that has to continue from year to year to year. So in our state, the number one thing we still have left to do, and I would tell you, we are far from where we need to be. And I had to laugh. The sports betting is not the only sin tax that goes toward early childhood education. We have several more that go to early childhood education. But we have to find an investment of over $115 million for the next at least 10 years if we're going to begin to meet our goals. I had to laugh or be upset. Earlier today, I was listening to a radio show, and they were talking about one of the gentlemen in our state who's running for Congress. He's one of our current senators, and he's running again. He has $36 million in his account right now. And I thought, 36 million, what could we do with $36 million toward early childhood education? So funding that would be continual, that would be year to year, not one time like the 40 million this year. We have got to find a way to make sure we have the funding. We also must make sure that all our families have access. Right now, they do not. And we know, as someone said earlier, that in our economy, it's about a $10 billion economic deficit. 1.3 billion deficit we face each year, and it's over 760 million just to the businesses. But if we invest this 115 million in the next 10 years each year, we will have a $12 billion increase to our budget. So it's very, very important. Y'all talked earlier about quality providers and certified teachers. We've had some tax incentives to get people certified, but we have to continue to get good teachers in our schools. But when you're making $9 or $10 an hour, and you can go to, as someone said earlier, Target and make a much higher salary and have benefits, it's hard to keep our teachers. So we've got to do something to incentivize our teachers to stay and to be certified. We have to improve our early childhood community networks. These are working very, very hard throughout the state to try to find solutions for more access for parents and also other methods of funding early childhood throughout the state. So all of these are very, very important, and we're just beginning. We have a long way to go.
Senator Fields, you mentioned the importance of getting the right minds at the table. Are the right minds joining the table? Are they anxious to participate, and are they bringing the much needed messaging?
Yes, I believe that the right minds are ready. because it's impacting, it's having a ripple effect across all industries and across all organizations. And so I think people are ready for the right idea and the right funding source. We just haven't put a framework behind it right now.
Representative Freiberg, you mentioned a number of statistics that helped catapult the legislative action, being very low in things like, SAT scores or ACT scores and reading comprehension and things like that. Are you using those metrics on a go-forward basis to assess the efficacy of the initiatives that have been undertaken?
You make a very good point, and I was going to try and say that, everybody who runs for office believes education is one of the most important things we ought to be looking at in the legislature. And early childhood is probably the most important element in the education system, particularly in our state where we have, counting Alice and poverty, over 51% of our young people find themselves there. So with the help of groups like the Early Childhood Care and Education Commission, we are digging data. And when you bring the data to the table and you show the data to the legislators and the business leaders and the advocates and the parents, all come to the legislature and say, look at the data. The data tells what the story is, and the story is just not great right now. So yes, mining the data is extremely important in our state, and I think it's made a difference. The problem comes, everybody knows the data, everybody believes the data, but where's that money going to come from? If it's coming from my little pot in this parish or that pot in that parish, that's where we need to get more buy-in, where this is something we all have to do together. And it's the only way we're going to improve our state, the only way.
Are you getting resistance to that message?
You don't get resistance. They agree. The resistance comes when you try to find the funds. What are you going to take the money out of to put it into? And that becomes the difficult process. So sports betting, which is new, was an easy bucket to get some money. So we just need to find other places in our budget that we can move some funds from.
Or new buckets.
Yeah, I don't know what those are going to be, but yeah, new buckets would be great. Hey, how about the federal government? That would be a nice new bucket.
Good point. I'm curious, Senator Fields, I know we lost you video-wise for a second. Hopefully we didn't lose you with audio. But
I'm back.
Yeah, similar question to you about the use of those sorts of statistics, to measure the efficacy of the new initiatives.
That's extremely important. In Colorado, I'm quite sure in other places, we try to make sure that we're using evidence-based data to drive and inform decisions that we do. So a lot of times, if we fund you to do some of this work, then you have to make sure that you are performing at a certain metrics as it relates to what we expect for you to deliver. And if you're not able to deliver that, then that can kind of change your funding patterns as it relates to money that comes to the state. But we're very prescriptive in reference to what the state expects from you in order to get access to these fundings as it relates to home visitation or early childhood development. And we too have a coordinated approach in the state of Colorado, where we have an administration that looks at early childhood development that starts really early on at birth, really all the way up to first grade, to make sure that we're coordinating our outreach efforts. And it's very, very prescriptive. It's very strategic, and it's refreshed from time to time, just to making sure that we're doing relevant work to make sure that we're preparing all the young minds out there.
And I would assume part of the difficulty is that you can't expect a 1 year or 2 year return on investment. This is a return on investment that will be years in the making.
Yes, you're absolutely right. And I think the other speaker mentioned this is something that you just can't start and stop, because the way once you learn something, you really don't unlearn it. I know we've had learning loss, but what you've learned, you've learned. We just need to build on that learning strategy, and that is incremental. Like I'm still learning today. That's why we have libraries. Libraries are full of books, and we haven't all achieved our full potential of everything, and neither have our kids. So it is an investment that's ongoing, just like we do for adults in any career. It's professional development along the way.
And I am curious as to your respective perceptions of what more the business community can be doing to help move the ball towards the goal line.
Well, the business community right now, they're hurting a little bit. I mean, the economy is back, but they're having to change the way we do business in the stores. Sometimes hours are cut. You don't see many 24-hour stores that are open 24 hours. They may close at 11 or 10, or you go to a store and you have to go to one area where you can get the checkout. Everyone is modifying the way we're doing work because of what COVID has brought to us as a nation and as a state. And so what I've been seeing the business community do is to help us understand what they need as it relates for workers. And so they have partnered with community colleges and with universities as relate to preparing folks, making sure that sometimes it's maybe you don't need 4 years. Maybe we can do that program in 18 months and get people to work where they're earning a very meaningful wage. So they're at the table, they're engaged because they're seeing that they're not able to deliver the standards of what they want to because they're short workforce. So they're ready to get involved. They're ready to add their ideas. They want to support their workers because they believe that's the culture and the mindset that they want their organization. So they're open to listening to the struggles that families and women and people have and how business can make modifications and maybe not be so rigid and to be much more agile and flexible. So I find that they're good partners. And when you do partner with them, it gets them on board before they come up with lots of oppositions about why it's not going to work.
Excellent point. I'm curious about the same question with the Louisiana business community. Is there more that the business community can do to help get that ball across the goal line?
I would hope the business community would make a total effort to support childcare in the community and childcare for each business for its workers. In Louisiana, and I know this was mentioned earlier, but in Louisiana, 1 in 7 residents with a child under age 4 have turned down a promotion because of childcare issues. Half of the residents with a child under age 4 reported missing work regularly. 1 in 6 had to quit a job. 1 in 13 had been fired because of child care issues. So if the business community were to rally around what can we do to have child care and early childhood education for our employees so we're not losing them and they're not having to drop out and we're bringing the best out of them. I mean, in our city, the hospitals tend to have child care centers at the hospitals. There are some businesses that have child care centers at the business. Those are the kinds of things I think business needs to think more about because they will benefit, our community will benefit, and our state will benefit if they will put their support toward these community centers.
Interesting. I see we're joined by Cynthia Osborne, who's probably got a burning question or two herself since she joined us. Welcome back, Cynthia.
Well, thank you for having me back to the panel. And I've really enjoyed listening to all that you have been sharing with each other. And I did have a question. Bridget, I think that one of the wonderful things that Ready Nation has done is to help to balance the conversation about the purpose of childcare as having two purposes. And one is to meet the needs that we have today of making sure that we have the ability for parents to be able to go to work, that they have a place to leave their children that is safe and enriching, and it allows them to work. And you have all been addressing that crisis. But the other thing that Ready Nation talks about and that we know from a developmental perspective is that childcare is also about learning, and it's about enriching the learning environment for children so that they are a better workforce for tomorrow. And I'd love to hear all three of you reflect on how we can try to get that second message infused more into the conversation. We've done more of that for pre-K. We've certainly done that for kindergarten. I think when most of us were children, kindergarten was the way that pre-K is today, a new thing, not necessarily universal and widespread, but it's become something that we all believe is really important for children's educational development, and pre-K is moving that way. In the earliest years, we know that that's where learning is taking place the most. How do we build that argument into all the things that you're also talking about in terms of making sure that folks can work? How do we make sure that we build in that children have an opportunity to learn in these earliest years in these enriching environments? I don't know if, Bridget, if you wanted to start with what you guys have been talking about in Ready Nation and how you've been articulating that dual message.
Well, it's certainly a very important element, and one that I guess in my view is wrapped around what we've been spending the majority of the time talking about, because we've been talking about the importance of quality childcare. And in my view, the quality of the childcare is that enriching educational experience, because we know that at that young age, the brain is a sponge that is eager for knowledge and information and learning. And it's such an ideal time to take advantage of that sponge-like brain, so that, as somebody said earlier, the 3-year-old who you're educating today, you are in fact educating them for high school and beyond, whatever that beyond may be, whether that's the immediate workforce, whether that is some sort of vocational or trade education, or whether that's university level or community college level. It really begins at that age, and developing that enthusiasm for learning, coupled with the experiences that demonstrate to that young mind that learning is fun. And if it's fun, we want to do more of it. So that it to me is all one and the same, but I'd be curious to hear from Representative Freiberg and Senator Fields, their thoughts on the matter.
So you want me to go? I'll go. I think almost every legislator can give you a statistic. Now, whether it's right or wrong, but they'll tell you, we know 80% of the brain development takes place birth to age 3, 90% by age 4. So this is very, very important. We need to talk about this brain development, and it has been very persuasive in the legislature. It's very interesting, though. It has been in the business community also. Last week, I was at a forum in New Orleans that was a STEM-focused and small business forum. And they introduced the day with a series of slides. And I think it was the third slide was early childhood education and how it affects everything in our state and the pipeline to jobs later. So I think this brain development and how important these first 4 years are is just critical, and we need everyone to know that. I would also say that the accountability system we put in place, I told you back in 2015, I think, will look at what is being done academically with students to help prepare them for where they need to be. So we are looking at it from several different angles, and I know there's more we probably can do.
Senator Shields, I would love to hear what you are thinking about this important question.
Thanks for the question. I can tell you that most people get it in reference to the importance of early childhood learning. And the reason they are is because at one point they were a child, or they know someone that's raising a family. And we see what happens when someone is delayed or is not able to be at the intellectual level that they should be because of maybe whatever reason it might be. But most people get the importance because someone taught them along the way. And sometimes, your parents are your first teachers in reference to learning some of the basic things like manners and those kinds of things. And then you go on and get formal development and training and learning. But what we're seeing now in today's time is not everyone comes from a family where they can teach one. And that's why home visitation and early childhood development is so important, because it supplements what a family may not know and can still invest those kind of ideas and thoughts into young minds. But most people understand the importance of quality education early on. And when you see that connectivity in the young kid's mind, when they discover something, it's just everyone wants to see a child to be able to embrace their full potential of who they are and what they can become. And it starts by, reassuring them and teaching them and investing in them. And I think it was Nelson Mandela who said something like, you can always tell a nation by how they invest in their kids. And so if we have a nation that's full with kids in poverty, then it's real easy for a lot of things to happen where they don't have the resources or the means to be able to learn everything that they need to know. So we do have lots of work to do, but I think that's the easiest sell, is to share the positive benefits of learning, because we keep them from all kinds of dangerous things. We teach them how to behave in school. We teach them how to, cross the street. I mean, if we can just do early learning as it relates to making better decisions so that your judgment's outcome, it's just a better investment. I read somewhere that for every dollar that we invest in early childhood education, that we're investing, it's like $5 in return. So it makes sense to invest upstream versus, waiting until a crisis happens.
That's a great note on which to end. And I can't imagine a better exclamation point on this discussion. Thank you so much, Senator Fields, Representative Freiberg, and I will turn it back over to you, Cynthia, for any closing comments.
Well, thank you all. Really, this was just wonderful. Thank you for sharing all your insights and your efforts. This is such a critical policy area that states are all grappling with, and I think that you've really illuminated how it is that they can begin to address this crisis. So thank you, and thank you, Bridget, for the work that you're doing, and all the folks at Ready Nation. Thanks again.
Thank you.
So in today's event, we have shared with you information on the 5 effective roadmap policies and 6 strategies that have strong evidence that they improve the health and well-being of infants and toddlers and their parents. But a state's policy choices don't operate in isolation from one another. Instead, the policies interact to create a system of support of varying generosity for parents and children. Tax credits and near cash support such as SNAP, they provide valuable resources for families. However, our analyses show that state minimum wage policies and child care subsidy policies are significant drivers of the variation across states and the amount of resources that a working parent has available to support their family. In the following graphics, we simulate the level of resources available annually to a single parent who has an infant and a toddler, and they work full-time at a minimum wage job. And they use a child care subsidy to leave their children in center-based care, and that center charges the equal access target rate, which is the 75th percentile of the state's market rate survey. And so in this simulation, we combine a state's minimum wage, the out-of-pocket child care expenses, their nutrition benefits, and tax credits to illustrate how the level of resources available to the stylized family varies across states. So this figure illustrates the wide variation in available resources due to state policy choices. In particular, the working parent has over $46,000 in annual resources to provide for their family if they live in the District of Columbia. And additionally, that parent in DC has access to paid family leave when their children were born, and they're eligible for Medicaid. But by contrast, because of low minimum wages and high out-of-pocket child care expenses, the same working parent would have just over $22,000 in annual resources for their family if they lived in either North Carolina or Georgia. The parent would also not have access to paid family leave or Medicaid. So let's take a closer look at the states that's ranked first and last in the resources for this stylized family. The minimum wage in DC is currently $16.10 an hour, and this compared to only $7.25 in Georgia. From earnings alone, the working parent has over twice the resources in DC as they have in Georgia. And this is a substantial difference, even after taking cost of living differences into account. But in order for that parent to work and earn those wages, they have to leave their infant and toddler in childcare. And in this example, they leave them in center-based care that meets that equal access target of the 75th percentile of the market rate. In DC, the working parent pays less than $1,000 in co-payments for both children, and that's over the whole year, and no additional fee to cover the difference between that subsidy and market price. This means that the parent gets to retain most of their earnings from their minimum wage job. But in Georgia, the working parent's required to pay just over $750 in copay for those two subsidized slots each year, but nearly $10,000 in additional fees to leave their children in quality care, which wipes out nearly all of their meager pay. And so they're left with less than $5,000 in earnings despite working full time. If you were this parent, what would you do? It's likely you would either decide that work just doesn't pay, or you would find cheaper and perhaps lower quality childcare arrangements for your children. So if we add in nutrition benefits and state and federal tax credits, the resources available to that family in Georgia do increase substantially, from less than $5,000 to over $22,000 a year. However, this level of resources is still less than half of what that same family would have access to if they lived in DC. In DC, the family receives fewer SNAP benefits and a lower federal tax credit because of their higher earnings. But DC's state earned income tax credit boosts their annual resources by over $2,300. And in total, the working parent in DC has more than $46,000 in resources to provide for their children. And most of those resources are from their earned income rather than government benefits. It's also instructive to see how resources vary when earnings are the same, but other policies differ. In this example, we show how the same working parent's resources differ whether they live in North Carolina, South Carolina, and Tennessee. All three states have the same federal minimum wage of $7.25 an hour, so the parents' earnings are the same regardless of the state they live in. And working full-time for the full year, the parent earns only about $15,000 a year, which leaves their family of three in poverty. To work full-time, the parent has to leave their children in childcare. And this graphic shows how states' childcare policies impact household resources and potentially work decisions. In North Carolina, the parent must pay over $1,500 per year in copays for their two children and an additional $8,600 annually to leave their children in quality care. And these out-of-pocket childcare expenses basically eviscerate their earnings, leaving them with less than $5,000 in resources despite full-time work. By contrast, in South Carolina, the working parent has to pay just over $600 in copay for childcare and no additional fees, which leaves the parents with most of their meager earnings. That same family in Tennessee would experience something in between. They'd be required to pay over $1,800 a year in copays and an additional $1,800 annually in additional fees for that quality care rate. But so rather than close to $15,000 a year in resources, that Tennessee family has just over $11,000 a year, or less than $1,000 a month, even though the parent's working full time. When we added nutrition benefits and federal tax credits, that boosts each of the parents' resources substantially. However, the working parent in South Carolina has over $8,000 more in resources to provide for their children than the same parent would have in North Carolina. And this difference is driven entirely by child care subsidy policy choices. In this final example, we see how changes in subsidy policies impact household resources for working parents. Those top two bars illustrate the changes in resources between last year and this year that our stylized family of three has in Michigan. This past year, Michigan substantially increased its reimbursement rates, and it eliminated out-of-pocket child care expenses for families at this income level. And although the state's minimum wage increased by only 22 cents per hour, the family's total resources increased by over $6,500. That increase is equivalent to approximately a $3 an hour increase in the minimum wage, but it all came from a reduction in out-of-pocket child care expenses. You can see that Minnesota also reduced out-of-pocket child care expenses and slightly increased its minimum wage. However, despite having a minimum wage this year that's 50 cents higher than Michigan's, the working parent in Minnesota has nearly $3,000 less in total annual resources to provide for their family because of their higher out-of-pocket child care expenses. So we're in the process of creating a calculator that your state can use to illustrate how your state policies choices would lead to changes in household resources. And you can see more in the roadmap of all of the state's policy choices and how they intersect. But it's clear from these examples that policy choices matter, and they lead to huge differences in the resources a working parent has to provide for their family. Whew. Well, wow. When you see all the progress that state policy leaders have made this past year toward implementing effective policies and strategies that research shows us that will improve the lives of children and families in their states, it's a bit overwhelming and really impressive. I realize there is so much more that needs to be done in every state to support children and families. But it's important to recognize the accomplishments thus far and to learn how states are making it happen. There truly is no more important investment that we can make. And we know that investing in these earliest years will not only improve outcomes in the short term, but it will have long-term benefits, not just for the children, but for all of us. So I want to thank you. I want to thank you for your dedication to this vital work. And I want to make sure that you understand that we are here to serve as a resource for you. And we really hope that the roadmap is a useful tool to help you set policy priorities and choose the best solutions to meet your goals, and to learn how to most effectively implement your state policies and strategies so they have the biggest impact on children and families, and that they can reduce long-standing disparities in access and outcomes. So reach out to us and let us know how we can help. Whether it's presenting your state's roadmap to educate others in your state, providing consultation on state policy actions, analyzing the return on investment of your policy choices, or evaluating the impact that your policies are having on the well-being of children and families in your states, we're here to be a resource for you. So thank you again. Thank you so much for the important work that you do. And we look forward to recognizing and celebrating all of your progress next year. Thank you again, and have a wonderful afternoon.